supports our gathering this week. Todos ustedes conocen a Christy King, es la directora de la oficina de Ministerios Culturales de la Diócesis, y es uno de los líderes de nuestra congregación. Christy received news this morning, just right before we went into prayer, that her grandmother, Agnes King, passed away this morning. Christy recibió noticias que antes de entrar en la oración que su abuela, Jimenez King, murió esta mañana, murió en Meridian. Her grandmother died in a care center in Meridian. So let us have just a moment of prayer for Agnes and for Christy and all her family, her dad and her aunt and all her cousins. Una oracióncita en silencio para Inés y Christy y su familia. Eternal rest grant unto Agnes, O Lord. May her soul and all the souls of the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen. Dale, Señor, el descanso eterno. Que ella y todos sus fieles difuntos, por medio de la misericordia de Dios, descansen en paz. Thank you, Christy. All our sympathy and our prayers to you and all your family. Anything we can do for you these days, let us know, okay? Thank you. Gracias.
Hi, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? My name is Vince Olea. I come to you from the Diocese of Fresno. It's the Central Valley of California. I am the director of our Diocesan Youth Retreat Center. We're one of the few dioceses that actually own a retreat center, and for good reason. I don't recommend it. Anyway. But that's where I come to you, and you know, I work with youth, and I worked with youth most of my life, and so luckily I'm very mature, and that really helps and comes into play, and so that always works. But what I do when I gather with young people, I want to know how they feel. But when you gather with a bunch of them, you can't always have the time to go around the room, how you feeling. So I want to do this. I know that we had a great prayer experience just now, but do this. When I say go, we're all going to say, good morning, God, this is, and then you'll say your name. So, good morning, God, this is Vince. Today I feel like and then say a number. Any number between 1 and 10, 1 being real horrible pain, 10 being the greatest thing ever. And so whatever number that is, just give voice to it. You don't have to explain why or what or anything about that number. Now when I've done this with youth, as we got more comfortable, then they started to share why they felt that way, and then we got to really got to know their hearts and where they're at. But so please bear with me. Let's do all that together, and I'll start it out, but we'll do it all together so nobody's going to hear your numbers. So just whatever it is. So, good morning, God.
Good morning, God.
Today I feel like 8.6. Okay. Now, if you know me, 8.6 is really good. So hovering around 7s usually. So, well, today we're excited. I'm here with my beautiful wife, Patty, and I'm going to introduce her in a minute. And we're just very excited to be here, to be a part of this Hispanic ministry convocation. And what I wanted to start with was some sort of logistic things. So I know you have a packet. If you could take out the schedule in your packet, please. So does everyone have their schedule? Okay. There are some minor changes, and if you have a pen and you want to make notes of it, please do. I'll try and do my best to kind of keep everybody alert of our timing of things. But we'll start with, so we have our morning and we see what that is. Patty's going to be speaking, and I'm going to be speaking, and we have lunch. Then we have our workshops. And you see you get to choose between 1 and 5, 1 of 5 workshops. And I believe there might be a map, or we'll let you know the locations of those workshops so you won't feel lost. But those workshops are going to go from 1:30 to 3 o'clock. They will end at 3. So that you see where it says Hispanics and the renewal of the Catholic Church. Where that says 3:30, that will actually begin at 3:15 and end at 4:15. Bless you. And now here's the big thing. Mass begins at 4:30, not 5 o'clock. So hopefully that helps. And then after Mass, you see that we have these evening sessions. And if you need to know where they're at, hopefully there's maps in your binders or in your packets. And if not, let us know, and we'll definitely make sure that you get to the right spot. So, any questions about the logistics of the day? Okay. Okay, now breathe deeply, now welcome everybody. You know, I have a son, he's 29, I love him very much. We're big texters. Anybody here a big texter? We text all the time, we text every day, and we've actually done a lot of theological reflection through texting. And so, now, I will say, a lot of that too has been based on Star Wars. So we're big Star Wars fans. And the language of Star Wars has helped us get to a language of faith and a language of kind of getting to know ourselves. But we're like everybody else in the room. We are moved and inspired by life. And you know, sometimes it just hits you, right? You're watching a movie. You're listening to a song while you're driving and you're crying for whatever reason. You know, you see just this beautiful moment. You go to a beautiful liturgy. There are just so many times when we're caught by life and we're inspired and we're moved. And what I tell my son and what he tells me back now that he's older is say, respond. Respond to that. Don't just be inspired, but respond to the inspiration. Do something with it because it wants to be more. And what we've known is that more, it's always two things, and it could be more than these two things. It's always a movement into relationship. A deeper movement into relationship, and there's always an action required of that. So whatever that might be, there's always these two components. And so my point is that I'm here today, I know I'm going to be inspired by all of you, by all the speakers, and I'm going to be moved. And then it's on me and on all of us to respond in whatever way that we're moved. Let it move us, and then it wants to be more, and we are the more. And the more is going to lead to any sort of imagining. Be creative this week. Let your imagination really flow, and let that work for all of us. Because inevitably, when we're inspired, and we will be this week, we're going to move deeper into relationships, and we're going to be called to some sort of action. What that is, we'll let God let us know at that point. So that's sort of the introduction for this week, and let's hope to all be inspired. Now I have the privilege of introducing somebody amazing. Make sure I get this all right. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, our first speaker of the week. Her name is Patty Jimenez. She was born in Ensenada, Baja California, Mexico, and immigrated to the U.S. when she was 3.5 years old. She grew up in a border town in San Diego, California. A cradle Catholic, Patty is a product of Catholic education. Last month, she received her doctorate in ministry, specializing in Hispanic Latino theology and ministry at Berry University in Miami, Florida. And Berry is a Dominican university. Her doctoral thesis focused on how social media is redefining the notion of Christian community among U.S. Hispanic Catholics. She obtained a master's in theological studies and a master's in ministry for a multicultural church from the Franciscan School of Theology in Berkeley. She has a BS in Child and Family Development from San Diego State University and is the founder of the website ushispanicministry.com. She has worked for over 20 years in the areas of youth ministry, catechesis, teaching, and administering lay formation programs. Patty has experience in parish, academia, and diocesan ministry, and is a speaker at a local, regional, and national events. She previously served as the Director of Ministries for the Diocese of Fresno, where she oversaw the departments and staff of Campesino and Multicultural Ministries, Prison Ministry, Catechetical Ministries, Family Life, Youth and Young Adult Ministry, Social Justice, Health Ministries, the School of Ministries, and the diocesan website, and she planned our wedding. All of that, that's a lot. Prior to ministry, Patty worked in the field of research in public health, and at one point was a cruise director in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 2 weeks, she will be presenting an essay on Hispanic ministry and technology at the Second National Symposium on Hispanic Catholic Ministry, sponsored by Loyola Marymount University. Her essay will be published earlier next year. She recently ran a national survey on Hispanic ministry, technology, and new media, and findings will be published soon in the fall on the website, ushispanicministry.com. In October, she will present at the Diocese National Conference in San Antonio, Texas. And this conference is on the best practices in Hispanic ministry and new media. She is a Franciscan at heart and hopes to soon answer the call to be Franciscan Third Order, just as her great-grandmother, Trinidad, once did in Mexico. She's also an amazing trainer of cats. She took in our stray cat, named her Botas, and trained her to jump from chair to chair to chair. And one of her goals in life is to get her to jump through a ring of fire. So, let's hope she does that. Please join me in welcoming Patty Jimenez.
Test 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me okay? Is that good? Okay. Well, good morning. Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
It's a pleasure to finally be here in person with all of you. I've been corresponding with some of you. Some of you I've seen through a computer screen. And so it's a pleasure to be here. Today, what I'm going to be addressing is I have the task to discuss the summit process that we will be leading this week. Can you hear me when I turn my head? Okay, I have to make sure that I stay on this side. I'm going to discuss the summit process, which we'll be leading this week, and also the work that the steering committee has accomplished thus far. My hope is that through this presentation, you're able to get a historical perspective on the process, also how it fits in the national conversation, and also more of the broader church, how it fits within the broader church, and also what it means to you personally, this process, and also for the church here in Boise. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish here at the church in Idaho. I want to actually warn you that I am using a new technology today. You're my guinea pigs. So be patient with me. I've already prayed to St. Isidore, who is the patron saint of technology and the internet, since I am using it for the internet. So I asked for your prayers for that. So why don't we get started with this? In the beginning, around August of 2012, there bishop. And this bishop had this amazing idea. He said, let's have a Hispanic ministry summit in June of 2014 during our convocation. And of course, everybody's response to this was, hooray, right? Everyone was super excited about it. Well, actually, I'm sure that there were many different reactions to this. The reactions might have been someone questioning, well, I'm not Hispanic. What does this mean to me? Someone might have been very upset, saying, why are we only focusing on one group? Why are all the resources being used for one ethnic group? Someone may have had a lot of opinions about it. They may have been saying, you know what, I think you should be doing this. Don't forget to do this. I want to do this. You know who you are. I'm not going to name you, right? And then there could have been some anxiety, some fear behind it. I've been doing the same thing for 100 years. My ministry is working great. What does this mean for my ministry? Right? All of these emotions, they're valid. They're human. Because when there's change, there's always tends to be some sort of resistance. So this is where the Office of Cultural Diversity comes in. They were tasked with taking this on and organizing this process and event. And so, Christy was very excited about it, and she got to work. Both her and Maricela were busy plugging away, planning, and visioning for this event. By the way, I've never been to the Diocesan Pastoral Center, but this is what it looks like in my head. And this is what I imagine Christy and Maricela doing all day. Now, in the fall of 2012, a steering committee was established consisting of 4 people from each of the 6 deaneries. An effort was made to include at least 1 priest and deacon from each deanery, as well as lay ministers or leaders. The bishop's cabinet also was invited to form part of this amazing steering committee. In February of 2013, Alejandro Aguilera Titus from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops facilitated a meeting of the steering committee, and he presented the National Pastoral Plan for Hispanic Ministry, and he suggested that the diocese gather input from La Base. What I mean from La Base is the grassroots. It's what we, my husband and I refer to as the trenches, usually the parishes, right? All the work that's happening in La Base. Now, the gathering of this input would be begin a process of what's called theological reflection. Many of you clergy, lay ministers who have received formation have studied methodology and theological reflection, so you're pretty familiar with this process. And there are different ones, the Whiteheads, Broom, Browning, and what we're using today is the methodology of C-Judge Act, which has traditionally been the methodology used within Hispanic Latino ministry in the U.S. and also Latin America. I want to give you a little bit of history behind this. I think it's important to situate us historically, because within Latino and Hispanic ministry, our memoria histórica, our historical memory, is really important to us. Every gathering, there's usually, let's talk about where we've been. So that those that are new know our history and know that they're not alone, that they're not starting from scratch. This methodology originated in the 1920s through the Young Christian Workers Movement. There was a philosopher in Belgium, and I'm totally going to butcher his name, Leon or Le Prune. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that's my pronunciation. He was responsible for developing this methodology, which he actually stole from his neighbor, who was using it for the elite. But he wanted to use it within the Christian workers movement that this Belgian priest had started. He had started working with factory workers at the time. There were a lot of issues regarding labor, and he wanted to address the issues that they experienced, the hardships. And so they used this methodology to address those issues. And reflect on what our church would say about treating workers. They based their work on the labor encyclicals of Pope Leo XIII and Pope Pius XI. Now, this methodology then spread to Latin America. The Latin American Catholic Action Movement adopted it in the 1940s and has been pivotal in developing Latino or Latin American theology, both in Latin America and here in the United States. It was a process of pastoral reflection that helped describe the reality, reflect on the condition that the church found itself in light of scripture and tradition, and then develop a plan for action to improve the situation. We know of theologians Leonardo Perlo-Bispo, and also the father of liberation theology, Gustavo Gutierrez, who also developed his own theology based on this methodology. It also had a great influence on the Latin American bishops. By the mid-1960s, they were using See Judge Act as a way for the Latin American Episcopal Conference to conduct their meetings. It was also used during the Second Vatican Council. The document Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world, utilized it in the development of the document. They used it to reflect on the reality, reflect on our tradition, and then develop a plan. In 2007, in Aparecida, Brazil, the Fifth General Conference of the Bishops of Latin America and the Caribbean also again utilized this method of reflection to respond to the needs of the church in Latin America. A reporter described this methodology as innately Latin American. What's interesting to note about this document, it was written by an Archbishop Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who is now our Pope Francis. So you often hear Pope Francis telling us we need to start from the reality of the people. He is a contextual theologian, a practical theologian. And so this is he's very familiar with this methodology that starts from the reality of the people. So I give you this history of how it was utilized in Europe and Latin America so you can situate and how it has moved. And now we're going to move to how it came to the United States. Now, it would make sense that Latin Americans who were immigrating to the United States would then adopt this method. We know that by 1945, the National Office for Hispanic Ministry was established here in the United States. By 1972, we had the first National Encuentro, which utilized this process to reflect on the needs of the Hispanic presence in the United States. In 1977, again, the second Encuentro utilized the method. 85, the third Encuentro utilized it. I know that the church here in Boise participated in the Encuentro 2000, is that correct? Anybody here participate in that process? We've got a couple of folks here who were part of that. So that utilized the same methodology. There was also in 2006 the first pastoral encuentro of Pastoral Juvenil Hispana, which is a Hispanic youth and young adult ministry, took place at the University of Notre Dame. Did anyone participate in that, at least locally or at Notre Dame? No? Someone? Yeah? Okay, so we do have one person who participated. So since 2000, your diocese has been participating at the national level in utilizing this methodology. And now as we move to 2006, where there's already the fifth encuentro that's being planned, and I'm sure that we will be utilizing this methodology as well. The primary concern of the encuentro process and the methodology of Hispanic pastoral planning was that ministries respond directly to the concrete reality of Latinos and Latinas, and that participation of the base, the grassroots, in the pastoral process be prioritized. So we have two of my mentors, Dr. Alicia Varela and Father Jorge Presmanes, pointing out that we need to start from the reality of the people that we serve, the Latino community, and that their needs and concerns be part of the pastoral process and that they be prioritized. There are all these different documents that have surfaced from all of these national gatherings. utilizing these methods. They started from the needs, reflected on a tradition, and then developed action plans to respond to those needs. That has been 42 years that we have been utilizing this within Hispanic ministry here in the United States. Now, I have the word crisis up here because generally, theological reflection, not always, but many of us practical theologians will refer to it as a discipline of crisis. You're responding to a crisis. And by crisis, I don't mean something that's horrible. It can be some sort of drastic change. Urban Heiting, here's a quote from him that says, "In times of crisis, when we see a major upheavals or changes in society, and when traditional approaches within the church lose their plausibility, we find great need for advice as to how we should act." So that's the purpose of practical theology and theological reflection that we will be leading. It always stems from a question that we may have. The question here started from, what are the priorities for the Hispanic community in the Diocese of Boise? So again, it's helpful to remember that you are part of a memoria histórica, or a historical memory. The Church of Idaho is now part of a pastoral reflection that initiated in Belgium, moved to Latin America, used during the Vatican II in Rome, in the US, and now today here in your Diocese of Boise. Okay, so we're going to start with the first step. Some of you who participated in the February workshop are familiar with this methodology. We worked it together. And so let's start with the first step, which is C, which is ver. That is a thorough reflection on the reality of the people that we serve. So in responding to the question, what are the priorities of the Hispanic community in the Church of Boise? The Diocese decided we're going to hold these listening sessions in the deaneries in October and November. Now, originally this was supposed to be a synod, and a synod required feedback from the faithful. And so that was one of the reasons why these listening sessions were established in October and November. But it's also because part of theological reflection requires feedback from the base. Now at these meetings, folks from all the various synods were asked to reflect on what are the strengths and weaknesses within Hispanic ministry and within their own parishes and deaneries, and also Office of Cultural Diversity presented to you an introduction to Hispanic ministry. Well, also, you had an opportunity to conduct parish surveys and complete them from September to December. They were filled out, some at those listening sessions in person, and some were able to do this online as well. All this data started coming in. We had notes from deanery meetings, conversations with leaders, and then the survey results. So all this information was gathered, and so the office found themselves asking, okay, we got this, but now what? What do we do with all of this? So at one point, Maricela got online. She Googled Hispanic Ministry Convocation. What ended up happening is she came across our website, ushispanicministry.com. Vince and I, while I was the director of ministries, he coordinated it and collaborated with my office in offering a Hispanic Ministry Convocation. We initially started the website as a means of offering information, up-to-date information and instant information as to what was happening during this event. We wanted those who couldn't be present to be able to follow us using new media and technology. And Vince wrote an article describing the methodology that we utilized for this. And so Maricela read that, she contacted me, and we started talking and met also with Christy online over the phone. And had these wonderful conversations about the church here in Idaho and what the needs were and the process that you have led thus far and for your listening. Because I came in during the process of the listening sessions and the collection of the surveys. And Christy and Maricela were like, well, we don't know where to go, or we're looking for direction as to what the next step was. And given my background in research in public health, I offered to be able to analyze the data for them and present a report. In your packets, you should all have the Hispanic Ministry survey results. We had an opportunity to read it. You don't have to do that right now, it's kind of long, but there's a lot of information in there regarding the status of your diocese in regards to Hispanic ministry. It covers information such as participant demographics, who completed the survey, who was the leadership that completed this. It includes parish demographics, parish trends in Hispanic ministry, and also a compilation of different groupings of what the strengths and weaknesses and suggestions that were coming from these deanery meetings. So if you get an opportunity, make sure you read that. This was sent out to your diocese on January 18th, and then given to the committee, the steering committee. They were asked to read it in preparation for a theological reflection. In dialoguing with Christy and Maricela, we talked about my background in teaching theological reflection, and they asked if I would come in and guide the steering committee through the process. Since I was doing the report and would know the data, I would be able to report the data and then lead them through a process of theological reflection. All right, so on February 3rd of 2014, I was scheduled to come on into the diocese. Unfortunately, my flight was canceled. Here I thought, okay, I'm going to be there in person presenting, but due to weather, I was stuck in San Francisco, had to head back to Fresno, and we had a backup plan, and we did it all online, which was a lot of fun, I'm sure, for Christy, who had to try and figure out how to be able to do this last minute and offer it. So we began the process of seeing, and we did this first by looking at the data. So I presented the data regarding who were the participants, what were their ministry roles, what was the level of training that pastoral ministers had here in the diocese, and also if parishes had Hispanic ministry. I then began to ask questions like, what surprised you about the report? What caught your attention? Did it validate preconceptions? And was anything missing? So I wanted to gather the wisdom and the experience of those pastoral ministers who were part of the steering committee and ask, well, what's missing? And we talked about several things that weren't in the report. For instance, there wasn't much mentioning of las quinceañeras. There was very little on apostolic movements, and also not much on English-speaking only Hispanics, so third and fourth generation. So we knew that there was some information that needed to be filled in and included within this process of theological reflection. The committee was given several tasks: create policies, guidelines, and action steps to meet the needs of the Hispanic community here in the diocese. And so everybody's like, all right, let's get to work, let's create these action plans, but in reality, there is a step that's missing. And even, I think, in our conversations, we struggled with, I know there were some committee members who, were saying, well, let's spend most of our time on the actions. Let's make sure we get those actions. And I was saying, you know what, we really need to make sure that we take the time to do that second step, which is reflecting on our tradition, which is the judge, step 2, which is the biblical and doctrinal reflection. In this step, we reflect by taking into consideration our experience, the context, and our tradition, and they all inform each other. I asked the groups, now at this point, I asked them, I want you to divide, the whole steering committee, I want you to divide by ministry. And I can't remember, do you remember, Christine, how many groups there were total?
We have 5 or 6.
There was about 5 or 6, and in addition, there was a few people who also, because of the storm, there was a snowstorm, couldn't drive in, who were also online, and I dialogued with them. And so I asked them to divide by catechesis, youth ministry. We looked at, I'm trying to remember, I can't recall all of the different areas, but vocations and leadership. So there were all these different groups, and they were all reflecting. And I asked them, I want you to think of a scripture passage that takes in consideration of your current ministerial context. So based on the report and your experience, think of a passage. And so eventually, they came to the conclusion that they wanted to use the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, and they selected various verses, but it's primarily chapter 12 that they decided would be a great reflection of the ministerial context. Then I said, you also need to think of a theological framework. For instance, like solidarity, communion and mission, or collaboration. Those theological frameworks to help guide you. And so they looked to Encuentro en Mission, a renewed pastoral framework for Hispanic ministry, which is a document by the USCCB. They themselves had created a framework with 4 priorities, which were liturgy and prayer life, communion and mission, solidarity, and formation and leadership development. So they might be phrased slightly different within the document, but those were the ones that they said, you know what, we want to use that same framework to frame what we're doing. So in this process of judging, we reflected on scripture and our tradition, and then we moved to act, the third step. The third step is when we develop pastoral conclusions. Okay, so at this point, they were still working in different groups by ministry. And I said, I want you to identify 3 to 5 priorities for each ministry. And so they were each given a huge sheet of paper and write down for youth ministry, what are the priorities right now? And I said, I want you to consider what the needs of the base are. Not what your own agenda is for your own particular ministry, but based on the reports and your experience. Okay, come up with these priorities, because it's very easy to say, well, this is what I want because it's what you want for your ministry, right? So they took in consideration always the needs of the base. So then we had all these sheets with all of these great ideas for, well, these are the priorities based on what we saw. But we can't just do everything. It's a lot to take on. So we had to narrow it down. So I asked them each, I want you to select your top 5 priorities within all of these posters or sheets that are here. Okay, select the top 5. So they went through and did that and helped narrow it down. Then after that, I asked them, I want you to identify 2 to 3 action steps for each priority. They went back in groups and then they did that. So that is as far as we got during that process. Is that correct, Christine? Oh, she's in the middle of it. It's okay. That's as far as we got, correct? And then there was the committee that took over afterwards. So this is as much as we were able to accomplish during that one-day workshop. Since then, the steering committee continued to work on priorities and action steps. 2 smaller committees were formed, the executive committee, which met a couple of times, and then the planning committee, which did most of the work that they originally envisioned the entire steering committee doing. So they're the ones who continued doing most of the work. 2 revisions of the goals and priorities were then emailed to the entire steering committee. Now, they gave feedback, and this feedback was integrated into the goals and into the priorities. They were presented to Bishop Driscoll, who then prayed about it. You know, he worked on it, and then he said, well, here's my feedback, and that was given back to the committee. All right, so then the committee modified them based on Bishop's feedback. So now, this is, you should have received via email the 4 priorities. This includes the needs of the diocese, what the goals are, proposed actions, and then who the lead agents are responsible for carrying these goals and priorities and needs. But we're not done yet. You don't think once we develop this, we're done? Okay, ya acabamos. We're not done. We have the reevaluate step. This is when We go, okay, we come back to the base. We go, here's what we found. Here are the proposals. Did we get it right? So this is where we take it back to you and say, what do you have to say about this? Is this accurate? What are your opinions on these proposals? How do they need to be fine-tuned? Okay, so now this is where the base comes back and reports back what the needs are. So once that's done during this week, they present to you the proposals, the goals, and the tasks, and you give your feedback. They're going to be edited based on that. Now step 5, there's a final step, which is the celebrate. We've got to celebrate. Within Hispanic and Latino theology and ministry, there's always something called el convivio. It's a part of a celebration. But it's not just about, hey, let's have a fun time, let's have a party. Within the encuentro process and through using C-Judge Act, we're celebrating different things. We celebrate the seeing part, which is celebrate the discovery of God in our personal and local reality. We also celebrate the encounter with God in the Word and in our tradition. And then through ACT, we celebrate the commitment to the transformation of reality. Thus far, I've presented to you the C-Judge Act methodology, how your diocese has employed it thus far, and a means to remain faithful to the encuentro process. Now, what I want to say is that this process isn't limited to Hispanic ministry. The document Encuentro and Mission is very clear about the purpose of Hispanic ministry. It is not just for the Hispanic Latino community. Hispanic ministry serves the entire church. And this methodology originated in Europe, has proved useful and transformative within a Hispanic Latino context in Latin America and here in the United States, and can certainly be employed across all ministries. Just a few days ago, I had the opportunity of gathering with catechetical leaders in the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and we were chatting about Pope Francis's message to catechists that he gave in September. It's a beautiful, beautiful reflection from him. And in it, he challenges them, telling them, do not be afraid to go out in the peripheries. And many of the catechists were questioning, well, how do we do this? How do we do this? And so I went through the process of C-Judge Act in helping them to respond. Okay, let's identify who are the peripheries, what are their needs, what does the gospel tradition have to say about how we respond in a particular situation like this, and how are we going to respond as catechists. So it's applicable to any ministry. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool for all of us who work from the base in the trenches and even up in the administrative levels. Oh, that was pretty fast. All right, so what I want to say is first that I'm truly grateful for the invitation, for having me here, for allowing me to be part of this process. In a way, it allows me to honor those who have gone before me, who utilize this method, and honor so many, particularly here in the United States, ministers, both lay, men and women, cleric, religious, who have worked so hard in this area of Hispanic ministry, and also honoring those who have taught me. The late Maya, or recently late Maya Angelou, was taught by her grandmother, who said, the poet, she was a poet, and she said, if you get, give, if you learn, teach. And so for me, I honor my own mentors who have taught me, and being able to share this with you today. What I'm hoping is that in the next few days, we also take time to celebrate all the work that has been done thus far in the area of Hispanic ministry within the diocese, the work that the steering committee has done, and especially the Office of Cultural Ministries. But let's also celebrate the work that's going to be done here in the next couple of days. I want to open up just to see if anybody has any questions before I hand it off to my husband. Yes.
Do we have a microphone? I guess I don't need a microphone. This first part, C, can that also be called naming the wound? Would that be a proper way
Sure.
of looking at it? Because I think in social justice work, a friend of mine in the seminary did his thesis on social justice work, but he called that first step is naming the wound. If you don't know what the wound is, you don't know how to heal the wound or to make progress. But anyway,
I would say that's the crisis.
Crisis.
That's
Yeah.
the crisis. The wound would probably be the crisis.
Okay.
C is more about seeing everything in our context. Who am I as a person of the minister? What are my gifts, my strengths, my weaknesses? Where do I need to improve? Who are the people that I serve? What are their needs and their strengths, their formation, all of that. So C is pretty broad. It's not just about the woundedness. So I would say that I would identify probably the woundedness as a crisis. There are different methodologies and they're all phrased differently.
Okay, well, I guess if you're, I always think in terms of healing, so anyway, that was just something I would needed some clarification on, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? All right. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. I love hearing when you hear that there's this whole history, this whole thought, and this whole level of reflection, and all these adaptations happening to even get us to the point where we're at. And I think that was a great build-up to see all that we've done and all the reflecting, that we are part of a history, part of a tradition that's very Catholic at its core. And what I love about Catholicism is that humanness and how we engage at that human level. And that's that C part that we're doing, that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So here's what we're going to do. If you don't mind, we're going to take a little break. That would mean bathroom, I guess, drinks, enjoy each other's company. Let's say in about 15 minutes or so. Then we'll reconvene here, and then we'll start again, and we'll see where we go, next.